We ended up the first part of this series with the arrest of Dillinger in Dayton and his subsequent transfer to the Allen County Sheriff in Lima, Ohio. The next and most dramatic phase in his career was about to begin. In 1933, the Allen County, Ohio Sheriff's Office and jail also included the sheriff's residence. The office was at the main entrance at the west side of the building. The whole complex was adjacent to the county courthouse, which made transporting prisoners to the courthouse much easier. Dillinger arrived here either late on September 28th or early on the 29th. According to later accounts, Dillinger got along well with pretty much everyone at the jail, with one jailer later describing him as a model prisoner. Unfortunately, this model prisoner had a catch: a gang of armed and dangerous friends that Dillinger had helped escape from prison. They owed Dillinger a big favor. As fate would have it, one of that gang, Harry Pierpont, had parents who had relocated to a farm near the small town of Leipzig, about 40 miles north of Lima. The escaped gang stayed at the farm, then moved to a newly acquired hideout down in Hamilton, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati. Once again, there's some confusion as to the exact location of the Hamilton hideout. One source lists it as 1052 South 2nd Street, but another source lists it as 1054. If it was 1054, then it's this house. If it was 1052, then it's gone forever, as it's now an empty lot. After settling into the new hideout, the gang decided to raise some cash with another bank robbery. The idea of robbing a bank way up in St. Mary's, Ohio, was likely suggested by gang member Charles Makeley, who had lived in St. Mary's at one time. They also made arrangements to rent a campsite about 10 miles southwest of Hamilton. It would be the next jumping-off point after they left the hideout in Hamilton. So, on Tuesday, October 3rd, 1933, at roughly 3 p.m., a large green sedan pulled up outside the First National Bank in St. Mary's. While the bank itself closed up long ago, the building still remains. Inside the car was Harry Pierpont, Charles Makeley, Russell Clark, Red Hamilton, and Ed Schaus. 3 of them, including Makeley, went inside. It's curious that Makeley was one of the 3, as he was instantly recognized as a local boy. Anyway, when the 3 came out, they were $12,000 to $13,000 richer. The gang headed back to Hamilton. As a side note, the St. Mary's Police Station has a display of artifacts related to the Dillinger days, which they were kind enough to let me see. The display includes 3 old Winchester riot guns that the police had at the time, along with period newspaper articles related to Dillinger and gang, and a club said to have belonged to Dillinger. Friday the 13th came a day early that October for Allen County Sheriff Jess Sarber. The following account is a composite made from local newspaper articles and trial testimony regarding the events of Thursday evening, October 12, 1933. Sheriff's Deputy Wilbur Sharp, dressed in his street clothes, arrived at the county jail around 6 p.m. and went in through the main entrance. Sharp saw Sheriff Sarber sitting at his desk reading a newspaper, probably this one, announcing that Machine Gun Kelly and his wife had just been given life sentences for kidnapping. Mrs. Sarber was seated at the other side of the desk working a crossword puzzle facing away from the front door. Sharp left his revolver still in its holster on Sarber's desk, played with the Sarber's dog Brownie for a short time, and then sat down on the couch along the wall next to the desk. This photo was taken at the crime scene later. It shows Deputy Sharp had left, seated roughly where he was sitting that evening. This deputy is sitting where Mrs. Sarber was, and the deputy at right is sitting at the sheriff's desk, where the sheriff was located. In the cell area, Dillinger was sitting at a table playing pinochle with 3 other inmates, including Art Miller, who would later testify what he saw and heard that night. Outside, 2 cars pulled up, and out came Pierpont, Makeley, Clark, Schaus, Hamilton, and Copeland. Pierpont, Makeley, and Clark were to go in. The others were to wait outside. In yet another crime scene photo, we again see Deputy Sharp sitting where he was that night, and Sheriff Sarber's son, Deputy Sheriff Don Sarber, sitting at his father's desk. The 3 went into the sheriff's office at roughly 6:25 p.m. The leader of the group, later identified as Harry Pierpont, walked over to the desk in front of Mrs. Sarber. He told the sheriff they were from the Indiana State Prison and wanted to see Dillinger. The sheriff asked to see their credentials, and in response, Pierpont pulled out his semi-automatic pistol and aimed it at the sheriff, saying, "Here are our credentials." Sarber said, "You can't do that," while reaching for the desk drawer where his .38 caliber revolver was kept. Deputy Sharp was in the process of rising from the couch as the other 2 men pulled their pistols out. Pierpont fired at the sheriff, the bullet hitting him in his lower left side, passing through his abdomen, out his right side, and finally into his right thigh. The sheriff fell over onto his right side, kicking his office chair out from under him. Pierpont may have also fired a second shot, but this time missed. Mrs. Sarber tried to run to her husband, but Pierpont grabbed her and held her back. The sheriff was lying on the floor, propped up on one elbow. When he tried to raise himself up, the shortest of the 3 men, later identified as Charles Makeley, ran around behind the desk and savagely clubbed the sheriff on the head with the butt of his pistol, more than once. And according to Sharp, at some point his pistol accidentally discharged from the force of one of the blows, firing a shot that went through the door leading into the jail. The 3rd gang member, later identified as Russell Clark, said, "Don't kill him," and Deputy Sharp told Clark, "Tell him to leave the sheriff alone. He's already down." At some point, one of the gunshots so startled Clark that reportedly his own gun accidentally fired, grazing one of his own fingers. Outside, an elderly couple passing by the jail heard the shots and started to walk up to the sheriff's office to see what was happening. Ed Schaus ran over from his post and said he would check on it for them. He poked his head inside the office for a few seconds and then went back to the couple and told them that furniture was being moved and some file drawers had fallen over. He helped escort the couple away. Inside, the gunmen were demanding the keys to the jail from Deputy Sharp, who said he didn't know where they were. The timing's a bit unclear, but apparently Pierpont searched the sheriff for the keys and then also started clubbing him when he couldn't find them. Mrs. Sarber yelled to stop hurting him, that she would get the keys. The sheriff lay on the floor moaning. His blood was all over the floor, running the entire length of his body. After Mrs. Sarber retrieved the keys, Pierpont grabbed them and threw them to Deputy Sharp, telling him to open the doors and make it snappy. Inside the jail, there were roughly 15 inmates. At the sound of the commotion up front, the pinochle game stopped. Art Miller walked up front to see what was happening, while Dillinger retrieved his hat and coat. Pierpont and Deputy Sharp appeared, and Pierpont gave Dillinger one of the guns that he had with him. As they started to leave, other inmates surged forward, and Pierpont fired off one last shot, yelling, "You get back there. You can get out when I'm gone." As Dillinger reached the office, he saw the sheriff lying on the blood-covered floor, and as he walked around him, he avoided eye contact with Mrs. Sarber. The sheriff moaned, "Oh, man, why did you do this to me? Mother, I believe I'm going to have to leave you." Pierpont grabbed Mrs. Sarber by the arm so forcefully that it was bruised for several days afterwards. He began to drag her back into the jail as she pleaded to be allowed to stay with her husband, or at least bring the sheriff back too so she could be with him. It was all to no avail, and she and Deputy Sharp were locked into an extra secure area called the Cage. As the gang was leaving, Deputy Sharp was able to break a window and get the attention of a young man walking by the building. The alarm had been sounded. The sheriff's son Don, also an Allen County deputy, arrived a short time later, finding Lima police and ambulance orderlies attending to his father. In terrible pain, the sheriff was driven to Lima Memorial Hospital and taken into surgery. Meanwhile, an acetylene torch was brought in to free Mrs. Sarber and Deputy Sharp from the cage. Once freed, she was immediately taken to the hospital. The sheriff died shortly after 8 p.m., death primarily due to blood loss and shock. While this was happening, the gang was heading back to their Hamilton hideout in 2 separate cars. The next day, Allen County posted a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the murderers of Sheriff Sarber. On Saturday, October 14th, approximately 2,500 people filled the Trinity Methodist Episcopal Church in Lima for Sheriff Sarber's funeral, with another 1,000 outside, unable to get in. Once the service was completed, a cortege of 60 cars, led by a police motorcycle squad that included Deputy Sharp, left the church and made its way to Walnut Grove Cemetery, roughly 15 miles to the northwest of Lima, for the sheriff's burial. The following day's Sunday paper described the funeral. There was also a small article describing the invasion of a police station in Auburn, Indiana, late Saturday night. 3 men raided the station, locked the policeman on duty into a cell, and made off with numerous guns, including a Thompson submachine gun, plus boxes of ammo. Not mentioned in the article, but according to several sources, 3 bulletproof vests were also taken. Dillinger and his buddies were already back to work. If you can believe it, Dillinger and Pierpont struck another police station in Peru, Indiana, exactly 1 week later, stealing even more Tommy guns and bulletproof vests. They then proceeded to rob more banks. By this time, they were headlining newspapers, and a guy in Washington named J. Edgar Hoover was taking a keen interest in them. However, for the time being, they were unstoppable. The rest of the events of Dillinger's short life mostly happened in places too far away to visit in person. But, to summarize, Dillinger and gang eventually made their way to Tucson, Arizona, where they were captured by police in January 1934. Dillinger was sent to the Lake County Jail at Crown Point, Indiana, to stand trial for the January 15th murder of East Chicago, Indiana Police Sergeant Patrick O'Malley. Pierpont, Makeley, and Clark were returned to Lima for the murder of Sheriff Sarber. Unlike the others in his gang, Dillinger made a spectacular escape from the Lake County Jail on March 3, 1934, just as Harry Pierpont's trial in Lima was about to begin. For Dillinger, the downside of his escape was that he took his stolen car across the Illinois state line, committing a federal crime. The FBI could now become officially involved. Dillinger linked up with other gang members, old and new, including Babyface Nelson, to rob banks in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Mason City, Iowa. He shot his way out of a police trap in St. Paul, Minnesota, and another one, along with his gang, at the Little Bohemia Lodge in northern Wisconsin. Following this, he underwent plastic surgery in a mostly unsuccessful attempt to disguise his appearance. His final bank job was in South Bend, Indiana on June 30th, 1934. His career came to an end the following month during a terrible heat wave when the FBI staked out the air-conditioned Biograph Theater in Chicago on the night of July 22nd. The official story was that Dillinger sensed he was being followed and ran before being fatally shot. Dillinger's father and his half-brother Hubert were picked up by the local undertaker and traveled in his hearse to McCready's funeral home in Chicago to retrieve Dillinger's body. They brought Dillinger back to Mooresville to the local Harvey funeral parlor. This Marco's Pizza now stands where the funeral home was once located. The following day, huge numbers of people braved the heat and came out for the viewing. That evening, the casket was taken to Sister Audrey's house in nearby Maywood. The following day, the outdoor funeral was held, though it was sometimes hard to hear because of planes filled with photographers flying by. The graveside service and burial took place during a summer thunderstorm at Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis, Wednesday, July 25, 1934. For a time, Indianapolis police guarded the grave, but ultimately Dillinger's coffin was encased in concrete to prevent grave robbing. This was one cell that Dillinger wouldn't escape. Dillinger's friends Pierpont, Makeley, and Clark had all been found guilty in Lima for the murder of Sheriff Sarber, with Clark being given life imprisonment and the other two sentenced to die in the electric chair. They were all taken to the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus. The story took a dramatic turn on Saturday, September 22, 1934, when Pierpont and Makeley tried to break out using fake guns. Both were shot by prison guards. Makeley died within an hour, but Pierpont recovered enough to be electrocuted just after midnight on Wednesday, October 17th. Pierpont evidently arranged for Makeley to be buried in a cemetery near Leipzig, Ohio, where his parents had a farm for a time. On a cold February day, we made it there and finally found Charlie's grave. Pierpont's funeral was in Leipzig, but his burial was at Holy Cross and St. Joseph Cemetery in Indianapolis, where he rests today. In spite of themselves, the criminals of the 1930s did more than anyone else to cause America to strengthen its law enforcement. They can still teach us a lesson about the need for strong law enforcement in America today.